The Atlanta Falcons just pulled off one of the most confusing offseason moves the NFL has seen in years, and the entire football world is trying to figure out what they're thinking. Analysts, fans, and even former players are staring at the same roster decisions and asking the exact same question. Is this a bold master plan or the beginning of a massive organizational meltdown? Because right now, something strange is happening in Atlanta. Instead of building stability around their young core, the Falcons appear to be diving headfirst into one of the most unpredictable quarterback situations in the entire league. A former franchise quarterback who was recently tied to a massive 9-figure contract suddenly shows up in Atlanta on a bargain deal. A young top 10 draft pick who was supposed to be the future is now fighting to prove he still belongs. And behind the scenes, rumors are swirling that the front office may not even be finished adding quarterbacks to the mix. At first glance, the move might look like a clever bargain. Signing a veteran quarterback with years of starting experience for almost nothing sounds like the kind of low-risk gamble smart teams make every year. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the situation becomes far more complicated. This wasn't a team quietly adding depth to a stable roster. This was a franchise already dealing with injuries, uncertainty, and pressure from a restless fan base, suddenly throwing another unpredictable element into the most important position on the field. And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because the quarterback Atlanta just brought in isn't walking into an empty locker room. He's stepping into a situation that already revolves around a young quarterback who was drafted to become the face of the franchise, a player who was promised the future of the organization, only to watch that future suddenly become a lot less certain. What makes the situation even more bizarre is that this isn't just about two quarterbacks competing for the same job. There's a deeper strategic decision behind these moves that has analysts across the league completely puzzled. A decision that could reshape how the Falcons' entire offense operates, or potentially create one of the most chaotic locker room battles we've seen in years. And if that wasn't enough, reports are now hinting that Atlanta might not even be finished yet. Because according to several whispers circulating around league circles, the Falcons may be considering adding yet another quarterback to this already crowded room. If that happens, Atlanta won't just have a competition under center, they'll have a full-blown quarterback experiment unfolding right in front of the entire NFL. But to understand why this situation is spiraling into one of the most talked about offseason stories in football, we have to rewind to the moment that triggered the entire chain reaction, a shocking contract situation in Miami that quietly sent shockwaves all the way to Atlanta. The chain reaction that led to Atlanta's bizarre quarterback situation didn't actually begin in Georgia. It started hundreds of miles away in South Florida with a contract that once looked like the foundation of a franchise, but quickly turned into one of the most uncomfortable financial situations in recent NFL memory. Just 2 off-seasons ago, the Miami Dolphins made a massive statement about their future. They handed their young quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, a staggering $212 million extension. At the time, the message seemed clear. Miami believed they had found their long-term leader, a quarterback with elite accuracy, lightning-fast decision-making, and the ability to run a high-powered passing offense when surrounded by explosive weapons. For a brief moment, the deal looked justified. When the system was clicking, Tua's quick release and precision passing made the Dolphins' offense one of the most dangerous units in football. Defenses struggled to keep up with the timing routes, the deep threats, and the constant pressure created by Miami's speed. But the NFL has a brutal way of exposing weaknesses, and the optimism surrounding that contract didn't last nearly as long as the Dolphins had hoped. Over time, concerns began to creep into the conversation. Some analysts questioned whether the offense was carrying the quarterback more than the quarterback was carrying the offense. Others pointed to recurring durability worries that seemed to hover over every season. And as the pressure mounted, the performances that once looked electrifying started to feel inconsistent. Then, the whispers started. Reports began circulating that Miami's front office was quietly reevaluating its long-term commitment. League insiders suggested the team was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the massive financial obligation tied to their quarterback. And when a franchise begins to lose confidence in a player tied to a 9-figure deal, the situation can spiral quickly. Eventually, the Dolphins made a move that shocked the league. Rather than trying to salvage the situation or restructure the deal, Miami reportedly chose the nuclear option. They swallowed a gigantic dead cap hit, one that insiders described as one of the most painful financial decisions a franchise could make, just to move on and reset the quarterback position. It was the kind of decision teams only make when they believe the current path is completely unsustainable. And that's where Atlanta stepped into the picture. While Miami was desperately trying to escape a contract that had become a burden, Atlanta saw an opportunity sitting right in front of them. A former starting quarterback with years of experience suddenly became available for a fraction of what he once cost. Instead of hundreds of millions, Atlanta could bring him in for the price of a backup. On the surface, it looked like a classic low-risk gamble. If the veteran rediscovered his old form, the Falcons would have pulled off one of the most cost-effective signings of the entire offseason. If it didn't work out, the financial damage would be almost non-existent. But the problem was never just about the money.
Because Atlanta wasn't adding this quarterback to a stable, clearly defined roster. They were dropping him directly into a situation that was already filled with uncertainty. A locker room where another quarterback had been promised the future of the franchise. And that's where the real drama begins. Michael Penix Jr. was supposed to represent the beginning of a new era in Atlanta. When the Falcons used a top 10 draft pick to bring him in, the message from the organization was crystal clear. This was the future of the franchise. A talented left-handed passer with a huge arm, big game experience, and the kind of leadership that teams hope can stabilize a locker room for the next decade. For Falcons fans, the excitement was immediate. After years of uncertainty at quarterback, the team finally had a young player they could rally around. The plan seemed simple. Let Penix learn the system, give him time to grow into the role, and slowly build an offense around his strengths. It wasn't supposed to be rushed, but it was supposed to be clear. Atlanta had chosen their guy. Then, everything changed. During what was supposed to be a developmental stretch early in his career, Penix suffered a devastating ACL injury in a matchup against Carolina. One moment he was leading the offense, the next he was facing the long, frustrating process of recovery. Anyone who follows the NFL knows how brutal that road can be. Months of rehabilitation, endless training sessions just to rebuild stability in the knee, and the constant pressure of trying to return to peak form before the next season begins. For Falcons fans, the excitement was immediate. After years of uncertainty at quarterback, the team finally had a young player they could rally around. The plan seemed simple. Let Penix learn the system, give him time to grow into the role, and slowly build an offense around his strengths. It wasn't supposed to be rushed, but it was supposed to be clear. Atlanta had chosen their guy. Then, everything changed. During what was supposed to be a developmental stretch early in his career, Penix suffered a devastating ACL injury in a matchup against Carolina. One moment he was leading the offense, the next he was facing the long, frustrating process of recovery. Anyone who follows the NFL knows how brutal that road can be. Months of rehabilitation, endless training sessions just to rebuild stability in the knee, and the constant pressure of trying to return to peak form before the next season begins. For a young quarterback who was just starting to establish himself, the timing couldn't have been worse. In situations like this, teams usually rally around their injured player. Coaches publicly reinforce their belief in him. The organization sends a message that the long-term plan hasn't changed. Stability becomes the priority, while the player fights his way back to full health. But the Falcons didn't exactly follow that script. Instead of quietly reinforcing their commitment to Penix, Atlanta made a move that instantly sparked questions around the league. They went out and signed a veteran quarterback with a strikingly similar playing style, a player capable of stepping into the same offensive structure Penix was expected to run. And that decision changed the entire dynamic inside the quarterback room. Suddenly, the young franchise quarterback wasn't just focused on recovery, he was also staring at a potential competition for his job before he had even fully returned to the field. Every throw in practice, every preseason snap,
every training camp report would now be viewed through the lens of comparison. For a rookie or second-year quarterback, that kind of pressure can be suffocating. Confidence is one of the most fragile things in professional sports. When a player believes the organization is fully behind them, mistakes become learning moments. But when that belief starts to feel shaky, every mistake suddenly feels like evidence that someone else should take over. And that's the uncomfortable reality Penix may now be facing. Because while he's pushing through rehab and trying to get back to full strength, the Falcons have created a situation where another quarterback with real starting experience is waiting in the wings. A veteran who has already proven he can run an offense at the professional level. But even that isn't the detail that truly stunned analysts across the NFL. The real twist, the one that made this entire situation feel almost unbelievable, had nothing to do with contracts or injuries. It had everything to do with a rare trait both quarterbacks happen to share, one that forces an entire offense to operate differently. For most NFL teams, the quarterback position revolves around one simple assumption: the passer is right-handed. It's such a deeply ingrained part of the sport that entire offensive systems are built around it. Protection schemes, route timing, play action movement, even how receivers track the football in the air. All of it is designed with a right-handed quarterback in mind. Left-handed quarterbacks exist in the league, but they're incredibly rare. In fact, decades can pass between true left-handed starters. When one does arrive, the entire offense usually has to adjust in subtle but important ways. The blind side shifts from the left tackle to the right tackle. The footwork of the offensive line changes slightly. Rollout plays often move in the opposite direction. Even the way a spiral spins through the air can feel different for receivers who have spent their entire careers catching passes from right-handed throwers. Because of those complications, most teams treat left-handed quarterbacks as a unique challenge. If you have one, you design the system around him, but if you don't, there's no real reason to complicate things. That's what makes the Falcons' current quarterback situation so strange. Instead of simply committing to one left-handed passer and adjusting the offense accordingly, Atlanta has somehow ended up with multiple quarterbacks who throw with the same uncommon orientation. Both Michael Penix Jr. and the veteran the Falcons just signed operate from the exact same left-handed setup. At first glance, some fans might think that actually makes things easier. After all, if both quarterbacks are left-handed, the offensive steam technically doesn't need to flip between starters and backups. But that's only part of the equation. The deeper issue is that left-handed quarterbacks are often brought in because their teams are fully committed to building the offense around them. It's a specialized approach that requires coordination from the offensive line to the receivers to the coaching staff calling plays. By stacking multiple quarterbacks with the same rare profile, the Falcons have created a situation where the entire offensive system now revolves around a very specific type of player, while still having no clear answer about who will actually lead the team on Sundays. That uncertainty can create serious complications for an offense trying to develop rhythm. Quarterbacks have different timing patterns, different release speeds, different comfort zones inside the pocket. Even two left-handed passers with similar styles can operate an offense in very different ways. One might prefer quick rhythm throws, another might rely more on extending plays outside the pocket. When the coaching staff is constantly preparing for multiple possibilities, the playbook can start to feel like it's being stretched in too many directions.
And that's exactly the concern many analysts have raised about Atlanta's situation. Instead of simplifying the offense around one identity, the Falcons appear to be juggling multiple versions of what the offense might look like. One built for a recovering young quarterback, another built for a veteran trying to prove he still belongs in the league. But if that balancing act wasn't complicated enough already, the next rumor that surfaced around the Falcons facility pushed the situation into an entirely different level of confusion. Because according to whispers circulating around league insiders, Atlanta might not even be done adding left-handed quarterbacks. Just when analysts thought the Falcons' quarterback situation had already reached peak confusion, another rumor began circulating around league circles that made people stop and do a double-take. According to multiple whispers coming from insiders, Atlanta's front office has at least explored the idea of bringing in yet another quarterback. And not just any quarterback. The name that keeps popping up in conversations is Dylan Gabriel. Now, for casual fans, that name might not immediately ring alarm bells. Gabriel is a talented young quarterback who built a reputation in college football for his quick decision-making, mobility, and ability to operate fast-paced offenses. Scouts have praised his leadership and competitiveness for years. On the surface, bringing in a young developmental passer is a completely normal move for an NFL team. But here's the twist that has everyone scratching their heads. Dylan Gabriel also throws left-handed. That detail alone has turned what might have been a routine roster rumor into something that feels almost surreal. If the Falcons actually pursued this move, Atlanta would potentially be stacking 3 left-handed quarterbacks inside the same room, a situation so unusual that many analysts can't remember a comparable example in modern NFL history. And once that rumor started spreading online, the reactions were immediate. Fans began joking that the Falcons were trying to corner the market on left-handed passers. Others wondered whether the coaching staff had developed a specific obsession with building an offense entirely around that rare quarterback profile. Some even speculated that Atlanta might be attempting to create a strategic advantage by forcing defenses to constantly adjust to the reversed pocket geometry. Of course, at this stage, much of that remains speculation. No official deal has been confirmed, and rumors during the NFL offseason tend to spread quickly, sometimes growing larger than the actual conversations happening inside front offices. Still, the fact that the possibility is even being discussed says a lot about how unusual Atlanta's quarterback strategy already appears to the rest of the league. And the connection between Dylan Gabriel and the Falcons' current leadership only fuels the speculation further. There have been reports that certain members of Atlanta's coaching staff have admired Gabriel's style of play dating back to earlier scouting cycles. Coaches often form strong impressions of players during the draft process, and those relationships sometimes resurface years later when roster opportunities appear. So when insiders began mentioning Atlanta as a possible landing spot, it didn't come completely out of nowhere. But the idea of adding another quarterback to an already crowded room, especially one who shares the same rare left-handed trait as the others, has only intensified the sense that the Falcons may be experimenting with something the rest of the league simply doesn't understand yet. Or perhaps something the rest of the league believes simply won't work. Because while Atlanta has been navigating this increasingly complicated quarterback puzzle, another franchise connected to this story has been moving in a completely different direction, and the contrast between the two organizations couldn't be more dramatic. While the Falcons were dominating headlines with one confusing quarterback rumor after another team connected to this story was operating in complete silence. No chaos, no dramatic experiments, just a clear, calculated plan unfolding behind the scenes. Up in Cleveland, the Browns had already made their decision about the direction of the franchise. After moving on from Kevin Stefanski, the organization didn't waste time chasing complicated quarterback puzzles or trying to reinvent their identity. Instead, they did something far less flashy, but far more telling. They focused on the trenches. In one of the most decisive moves of the offseason, Cleveland locked down former first-round offensive guard Zion Johnson with a massive 3-year contract worth nearly $49 million, including more than $30 million guaranteed. For a guard, that kind of investment speaks volumes. It instantly placed Johnson among the better-paid interior linemen in the league, and it sent a message that the Browns were prioritizing physical dominance over off-season headlines.
This wasn't a glamorous signing designed to win social media debates. It was the kind of move serious football teams make when they understand how games are actually won. Because while quarterbacks grab the spotlight, championships are often built in the dirt. Offensive lines determine whether a quarterback has time to throw. They determine whether a running game can control the clock. And when a front office spends that kind of money protecting the pocket, they're telling the entire locker room exactly what their philosophy is. Cleveland wanted stability. They wanted protection for whoever lines up behind center. They wanted a foundation that allows an offense to operate without constant chaos. And most importantly, they wanted to remove the kind of uncertainty that can destroy confidence inside a locker room. Compare that to what's happening in Atlanta. The Falcons are juggling multiple quarterbacks, exploring rumors about even more additions, and trying to figure out what their offense might look like months before the season even begins. Cleveland, on the other hand, appears to be building something much simpler, a roster that wins by controlling the fundamentals. But strengthening the offensive line was only the first step in Cleveland's reset, because the real transformation inside that organization is happening at the most important position on the field. And the quarterback at the center of that transformation is a name that has already begun generating enormous buzz across the league, a player many fans believe could become the new face of the Browns franchise. While Atlanta's quarterback situation continues to raise eyebrows around the league, Cleveland is quietly turning the page to a completely new chapter, one centered around a player who has been drawing attention long before he ever stepped onto an NFL field. That player is Shedeur Sanders. From the moment Sanders entered the professional spotlight, expectations followed him everywhere. His college career was already surrounded by national attention, not only because of his talent, but because of the spotlight that naturally came with his name. But what made him stand out wasn't just the buzz, it was the composure he showed under pressure, the ability to deliver accurate throws in tight windows, and the confidence he carried into every game. Now, in Cleveland, that confidence is becoming the foundation of a brand new era. Under new head coach Todd Monken, the Browns are creating a quarterback environment that feels dramatically different from the one that existed just a season ago. Instead of confusion about the team's direction, the message inside the building is reportedly much clearer. Competition will exist, but it will be structured around growth, accountability, and long-term stability. Training camp is expected to become the stage where that vision truly begins to take shape. Unlike the chaotic quarterback questions unfolding in Atlanta, Cleveland appears to be approaching the position with a much more controlled plan. Sanders is being given the opportunity to prove himself as the centerpiece of the offense, while the coaching staff focuses on developing a system that highlights his strengths. That kind of clarity matters more than most people realize. Quarterbacks thrive when the structure around them is stable, when the playbook remains consistent, when the locker room understands who the leader of the offense is supposed to be. Cleveland's approach seems designed to create exactly that type of environment, and the ripple effects are already starting to show. Several roster decisions suggest the Browns are actively reshaping the team to fit a new offensive identity. Some familiar veterans have quietly moved on, while younger pieces are stepping into larger roles. Every move signals that the organization is committed to building a roster that aligns with its evolving vision. For Browns fans who have endured years of quarterback uncertainty, that kind of direction feels refreshing. But the most fascinating part of this story isn't just Cleveland's reset, it's the stark contrast between two franchises that were once connected through coaching leadership, yet now appear to be moving in completely opposite directions. One team is simplifying its approach and building around a clear offensive identity. The other is experimenting with one of the most unusual quarterback situations the league has seen in years. And that contrast is exactly why the reaction from Falcons fans has grown louder with every passing week. For Falcons fans, patience has never been easy. This is a fan base that has lived through some of the most painful moments in modern NFL history. Every supporter in Atlanta knows the feeling of watching a promising season suddenly collapse, and the shadow of past heartbreak still hangs over the franchise like a storm cloud that refuses to move. The memory that still gets mentioned in every conversation is the infamous 28-3 collapse. Even years later, it remains one of the most shocking championship losses the league has ever seen. Falcons fans have spent seasons trying to move forward from that moment, hoping each new roster rebuild would finally deliver stability and redemption. That's why the current situation feels so frustrating to many people in Atlanta.
After years of rebuilding and roster turnover, fans were hoping for something simple this offseason, a clear direction, a plan they could believe in, a team that looked organized and focused on building toward a sustainable future. Instead, what they've watched unfold looks more like a confusing experiment. The quarterback room, arguably the most important position group on the entire roster, has suddenly become one of the most unusual situations in the league.
A recovering young quarterback who was supposed to be the long-term answer is now sharing the spotlight with a veteran reclamation project. Rumors continue to swirl about even more additions to the room, and every new headline seems to raise more questions than answers. Naturally, the reaction online has been intense. Social media comment sections have turned into a mixture of sarcasm, frustration, and nervous humor. Some fans joke that Atlanta appears to be collecting left-handed quarterbacks like rare trading cards. Others openly wonder whether the front office actually has a clear plan at all. When supporters begin mocking their own team's strategy, it's usually a sign that confidence is starting to crack. And it isn't just Falcons fans paying attention. Rival supporters across the NFC South have been watching the situation unfold with a mix of disbelief and amusement. Fans of the Saints, Buccaneers, and Panthers have flooded discussion threads with reactions ranging from confusion to outright laughter. When division rivals start celebrating your offseason decisions, that's rarely a good sign. But underneath all the jokes and memes is something deeper: exhaustion. Atlanta fans have endured years of instability, coaching changes, and roster experiments that never quite worked the way they were supposed to. Every offseason brings hope that the next plan will finally be the one that puts the franchise back on solid ground. Right now, though, many supporters are staring at the Falcons' quarterback situation and wondering whether the organization has accidentally created a problem far bigger than the one it was trying to solve. And that uncertainty leads to the biggest question hovering over this entire story. And that question is impossible to ignore now. Is Atlanta secretly building something revolutionary, or are we watching a franchise walk straight into another disaster? Because when you step back and look at everything that has happened, the Falcons' offseason feels like one giant gamble. A massive contract fallout in Miami suddenly delivers a veteran quarterback to Atlanta on a bargain deal. A young franchise quarterback is fighting his way back from a brutal injury while trying to protect the future he was promised. Rumors continue to swirl about yet another quarterback joining the mix, and somehow the entire situation revolves around one of the rarest traits in football: left-handed passers. On one hand, you could argue there's a strange kind of logic behind it all. If a coaching staff truly believes it has cracked the code for building an offense around left-handed quarterbacks, stacking players with similar traits could theoretically simplify the system. The protection schemes stay consistent, the playbook stays flipped in the same direction. In theory, the offense could develop a rhythm that opposing defenses rarely encounter. But the NFL isn't played in theory. History has shown again and again that the teams who succeed in this league usually keep things simple. They identify their franchise quarterback, build the system around him, and spend the rest of the roster strengthening the fundamentals: protection, discipline, continuity. Right now, Atlanta seems to be doing the exact opposite. Instead of clarity, there's confusion. Instead of stability, there's competition layered on top of uncertainty. And instead of building a single offensive identity, the Falcons appear to be experimenting with a strategy that very few teams have ever attempted before. Of course, there's always the chance that this is the move that shocks everyone. Football has seen its share of unconventional ideas turn into breakthroughs. If Atlanta somehow pieces this puzzle together and the offense clicks, the Falcons could look like the smartest team in the league for daring to try something different. But the other possibility is much more familiar. Because when teams convince themselves they've outsmarted the rest of the NFL, the league usually has a way of humbling them very quickly. The season begins, the games start counting, and every complicated plan eventually runs headfirst into the brutal simplicity of football fundamentals. And that's why all eyes are now on Atlanta. Whether this left-handed quarterback experiment turns into a stroke of genius or one of the strangest miscalculations in recent NFL memory, one thing is certain: the Falcons have officially become one of the most fascinating storylines in the entire league. The only question left is which direction this story is going to go when the season finally begins.